She was just another passenger waiting for her flight at a crowded airport. She was well-dressed and composed, but to two airport police officers and a wealthy white passenger, her presence, a successful black woman, was an annoyance. She was stopped without reason and subjected to prejudicial probing questions about her business class ticket and finances, questions no white passenger should have to face. When she protested in a just manner, demanding respect and basic civil rights, hell broke loose. She was subjected to insults, slurs directed at the color of her skin that echoed through the stunned crowd. She was handcuffed right there in front of hundreds of people. The woman was treated like a criminal, publicly humiliated, all because of the blind racism and vitriol of others. But these two cops, in their arrogance and abuse of power, made a terrible mistake, a mistake that would change their lives forever. They had no idea who the woman they were escorting really was. She was no ordinary passenger. She held one of the most powerful positions in the United States Department of Justice. What will happen when the truth comes out? How will the two cops react when they realize who they attacked? Will their belated pleas save anything? And what will be the price for them and the person who provoked them? Follow this dramatic story. Los Verdes International Airport was humming with a familiar kind of chaos, announcements echoing through glass walls, heels clicking on polished marble, children whining as parents negotiated boarding passes and backpacks. It was a Friday evening, and the air carried the scent of roasted coffee, cologne, and something unspoken stress mixed with expectation. In the middle of it all, Dr. Camilla Rowe stood quietly at gate B9. Her presence was calm, her posture upright, dressed in tailored charcoal slacks, a cream silk blouse, and low black heels. She blended professionalism with quiet elegance. No assistant accompanied her, no security detail, just a brown leather carry-on at her side and a digital tablet she held with precise focus. She was reviewing legal briefs, nothing urgent, just habit. After a 3-day legal conference in San Francisco, Camilla was ready to return to D.C., to her home, her books, her silence. She was tired, but not visibly so. Decades of training had taught her how to wear poise like armor. At 53, Camilla had grown accustomed to being the only black woman in rooms filled with power. Courtrooms, panels, government halls. She had grown accustomed, but not immune to the stares, the second glances, the subtle narrowing of eyes that preceded questions like, "Who are you here with?" or "Are you sure you're in the right line?" And sure enough, it came. Several feet away, Evelyn Whitmore, 60, white, draped in diamonds and silk, looked at Camilla with a narrowed gaze that held both suspicion and indignation. Evelyn's designer heels tapped impatiently as she surveyed the line. Her perfectly manicured hand clutched her Hermes bag, and her heavily powdered face twitched at every minor inconvenience. She muttered something to the man beside her, loud enough for others to hear. "These days, anyone gets to fly business class. It's ridiculous." Her words, laced with bitterness, floated in the air like poison. Her eyes never left Camilla. The line moved forward. Camilla stepped with it. She felt the eyes, the disapproval, but she remained still inside. Not surprised, not shaken. A young gate agent offered her a polite nod, checking her boarding pass. Camilla returned it with a small smile. But behind them, Evelyn's voice rang out again, sharper this time. "Excuse me, this woman has been looking at my bag. She's acting suspicious. You should check her documents. Heads turned. A few murmurs rippled through the waiting crowd. Camilla blinked once, slowly. She had felt this moment coming, not from Evelyn alone, but from the weight of centuries that sat quietly behind such words. But this time, Evelyn wasn't just throwing words. She was flagging down two airport police officers on patrol nearby. And in seconds, everything would change. Officer Grant Mallory had seen enough in his 22 years of service to know when a situation needed diffusing, or so he liked to believe. Tall, broad-shouldered, and gray at the temples, he carried himself with the tired authority of a man who thought he understood the world better than it understood itself. Beside him walked Officer Brent Carson, young, fast-talking, and eager to make his mark. Brent's boots always hit the floor like he was challenging the ground itself. His eyes darted, scanning for control, for recognition. And when Evelyn Whitmore waved them down, he was the first to respond. "She's making me uncomfortable," Evelyn said breathlessly, pointing a trembling finger toward Camilla Rowe, who stood motionless in the priority boarding line. "What's going on, ma'am?" Grant asked, stepping between Evelyn and the crowd now watching with growing curiosity. "That woman, she's been staring at my bag, whispering things. I don't feel safe around her. Please, do something before we board the plane." Brent narrowed his eyes at Camilla. "Which one?" "That one," Evelyn hissed. "The one in the blouse. The one pretending to be someone important." Camilla slowly turned her head. She heard every word. Her fingers curled tighter around her tablet. She could feel the oxygen thicken, the space around her shrink. Officer Mallory and Carson approached, clearing their throats and puffing their chests like they were preparing for resistance. But there was none. Camilla didn't move. "Ma'am, we need a quick word," Mallory said, his voice level but sharp. "Please step out of the line." Camilla studied him with practiced calm. "May I ask why?" "There's been a complaint," Brent interrupted. "Passenger says you're acting suspiciously." "What behavior are you referring to?" she asked, her voice clear, unwavering. "Look, ma'am," Brent said, already annoyed. "We don't need the attitude. Just step aside and cooperate." Mallory gestured again. "Let's not make this more difficult than it needs to be." Camilla exhaled slowly. She closed her tablet, placed it in her bag, and stepped aside, the whispers rising behind her like smoke. She turned to face the officers. "I'd like to know the nature of the accusation." Grant tilted his head. "We're asking the questions here." Brent added, "You have ID boarding pass," without a word. Camilla retrieved her wallet, offering both documents with controlled grace. Mallory inspected the ID. "Camilla Rowe," he read aloud, then raised an eyebrow at her business class boarding pass. "Flying pretty fancy today, aren't we?" Camilla's lips didn't twitch. "Is that a question about my ticket or my skin?" The air went thinner. Mallory coughed. "Let's stay focused," he muttered. But Brent smirked, holding up the boarding pass. "What exactly do you do, Mrs. Rowe?" "I'll answer that when you tell me the basis for detaining me." Brent's patience broke. "That's enough. Your attitude alone is suspicious." Camilla's jaw locked, but she didn't flinch. "I have complied with your requests, but if you continue this without cause, you will be violating my civil rights." Brent rolled his eyes. "We're not playing courtroom games here, lady." The mood in the gate area had shifted. Phones were now recording. Faces watched in silent disbelief. Some were passengers, others staff. Even the young gate agent who had smiled at Camilla earlier looked horrified. "You've made a mistake," Camilla said quietly, "and you still have time to correct it." Mallory hesitated. He could feel the heat rising. Something wasn't right. But Brent was already beyond return. He pulled the handcuffs from his belt. "You're under arrest. Disturbing public order. Failing to cooperate." Camilla's eyes widened just slightly, her breath catching, but she didn't resist. "This is unlawful," she said. "You're escalating based on assumptions?" Mallory hesitated again. "Brent, maybe we—" "No," Brent barked. "She wants to test us. Let's show her we don't bluff." And with that, he grabbed her wrist, twisting it behind her back. Gasps erupted around them. Camilla winced, but held her head high. She did not cry out. She did not plead. The cuffs snapped shut cold metal against warm skin. Sharp, biting. Her arms locked behind her as Brent shoved her forward. "This is insane," someone in the crowd shouted. "Let her go," another voice called out. But no one stepped forward. The walk through the terminal was long and agonizing. Mallory and Carson flanked her like she was a threat to national security. Camilla kept her back straight, her eyes forward. Not because she wasn't in pain, but because she refused to let them see it. The airport corridor stretched endlessly, every step echoing humiliation. Children stared. Mothers shielded them. Men whispered. A few took pictures, unsure of what they were seeing. The woman in handcuffs didn't look like a criminal. She looked important. Finally, they reached a small airport police station tucked behind Terminal B. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed, casting sterile shadows across gray linoleum floors. Camilla was led into the intake room. A young officer behind the desk glanced up, clearly unprepared for what he saw. "Name?" he asked, monotone. "Dr. Camilla Rowe," she said softly. He began typing. "Occupation." She looked up. Behind her, Mallory and Carson leaned against the wall, arms crossed, still smug. Camilla met the intake officer's gaze squarely. "I am the chief legal advisor to the United States Department of Justice." The sound of keys stopped. The room went still. "What?" the officer whispered. Camilla repeated herself. Mallory's jaw slackened. Brent's smirk vanished. "What did you say?" Brent stammered. "You heard me," Camilla said, calm and firm. "And now, I suggest you both call your supervisor." Immediately, Brent looked like he'd seen a ghost. Mallory took a step back, sweat beading at his temple. Their world just moments ago, so secure, was crumbling beneath them. For several seconds, no one in the small police intake room moved. The humming of the ceiling lights seemed to grow louder, like the static before a thunderclap. Camilla Rowe stood tall, her hands still cuffed behind her back, her tone steady but commanding. "I said," she repeated, "I am the chief legal advisor to the United States Department of Justice." The young intake officer blinked. Slowly, he looked down at her ID again, then up at her face, his breath caught in his throat. He fumbled for the phone on his desk. Behind her, Officer Grant Mallory swayed slightly, like a man who just realized he was standing on the edge of a cliff. Officer Brent Carson, so recently filled with fire, now stared with wide, panicked eyes. Chief, Chief Legal Advisor, he murmured, voice barely audible. No, you're lying. Camilla turned to face him, the cuffs pulling against her spine. You saw my ID. You ignored it. You ignored my words, my cooperation, and my humanity. And now, Officer Carson, you will face everything you've tried to escape with your badge. The intake officer's voice trembled into the receiver. Yes, sir. Right away. She's here now. It's urgent. Within 15 minutes, the air in the room had changed completely. A storm of authority descended upon the small space like a tidal wave. First came the chief of airport security, flanked by 2 deputies. Their faces were pale, stiff with dread. They didn't speak immediately. They didn't need to. Next came representatives from the U.S. Marshals Service, the very agency tasked with protecting federal legal personnel. Behind them was a deputy director from the Department of Justice's Office of Legal Counsel, someone who had worked under Camilla Rowe for over a decade. The young intake officer moved to unfasten her cuffs, but the security chief stopped him. Let the marshals handle it. One of the marshals stepped forward and, with utmost care, removed the cuffs from her wrists. Red, raw indentations wrapped around her skin like fresh wounds. Dr. Rowe, the marshal said quietly, are you injured? I'm intact, she replied. But there's damage to the law, to the trust we ask citizens to place in it. Grant Mallory looked as though he might collapse. Brent Carson had turned completely white, clutching the edge of a desk like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Camilla addressed the airport security chief directly, her voice calm but sharp. I expect a full report filed within 12 hours. I also expect all body cam footage, radio transmissions, and security camera feeds to be preserved. Do not attempt to review or filter anything before federal oversight arrives. The man nodded wordlessly, sweat dotting his brow. She turned to the deputy from DOJ. Contact Internal Affairs, contact Civil Rights, and contact the Inspector General's office. I want this incident cataloged, investigated, and prosecuted where appropriate. Then she turned, slowly, to face Mallory and Carson. You arrested me under fabricated claims, she said. You humiliated me in public. You applied force without cause. You ignored my documentation, my legal standing, and my warnings. You allowed your prejudice to dictate the law. Neither officer could look her in the eye. I hope you remember this day, she continued, not because of who I am, but because of what you chose to do when you thought I was nobody. Then, to the marshal, escort me to a private lounge. I will prepare my statement there. As she left the room, reporters were already gathering outside. Someone had leaked what had happened, and the scent of scandal was heavy in the air. The press didn't get a statement, not yet, but they caught a glimpse of Camilla Rowe walking with quiet authority, flanked by federal agents. They caught the looks of dread on the faces of the airport officers behind her. A special press conference was held by the Department of Justice. The spokesperson confirmed that Dr. Camilla Rowe had been wrongfully detained at Los Verdes International Airport and that a full federal investigation was underway. Grant Mallory and Brent Carson were suspended immediately. Their body cam footage, now under federal protection, showed clear evidence of racial profiling, use of excessive force, and disregard for federal identification. Camilla's legal team filed a formal civil rights violation complaint within the week. The DOJ's Civil Rights Division began interviews with airport personnel, passengers who had witnessed the event, and even Evelyn Whitmore, the instigator. Evelyn had returned to her mansion in Connecticut, expecting the incident to disappear into the ether. But the FBI arrived within days. She was questioned for filing a false report, racially motivated misrepresentation, and inciting the wrongful detainment of a federal officer. Face pale and trembling, she insisted she hadn't known who Camilla was. The agent's reply was simple. You didn't need to know who she was to know you were lying. Evelyn faced both a civil lawsuit for damages and the possibility of criminal charges, depending on the results of the DOJ's findings. The airport issued a public apology, but Camilla never appeared in the media storm. She returned to her work in Washington quietly, but her name now rang louder than ever. Grant Mallory and Brent Carson were formally charged in federal court with civil rights violations under color of law, unlawful detention, and use of unnecessary force against a government official. The story captured national headlines. Commentators on both sides debated what it meant, but those who knew the law understood this was a reckoning. Camilla remained composed. She refused interviews, but she issued one written statement. This is not about me. It never was. It's about the idea that power, unchecked by justice, becomes poison. We can either turn away or we can confront it. I chose to confront it. 3 months had passed since the incident at Los Verdes International Airport, but the ripple effects had only grown stronger. What began as a casual act of racial profiling became a national flashpoint, a mirror held up to a justice system grappling with its contradictions. The federal trial of officers Grant Mallory and Brent Carson commenced in a packed courtroom in Washington, D.C. Under the watchful eyes of reporters, civil rights advocates, and everyday Americans who had followed every headline. Inside the courtroom, Dr. Camilla Rowe sat with unshaken composure. Her hair was tied back, her expression unreadable. She wasn't there for revenge. She was there for truth and for something deeper, accountability. The prosecution wasted no time. They presented a meticulous case backed by irrefutable evidence. Body cam footage showing Mallory and Carson ignoring Camilla's ID, mocking her credentials. Audio recordings of Evelyn Whitmore's baseless accusations. Testimonies from witnesses at Gate B9 who had watched the event unfold with disbelief. When the footage of Carson cuffing Camilla played, his hand twisting her arm behind her back as she clearly voiced her compliance. The courtroom fell into a chilling silence. The prosecution's closing argument hit with the weight of history. They didn't arrest a threat. They arrested a woman, a black woman, a federal legal official, and they did it not because of what she did, but because of what they assumed she could not be. Brent sat hunched at the defense table, his youthful arrogance now replaced by silent dread. When he took the stand, his voice cracked. "I didn't know," he said. "I thought she was being difficult. I didn't mean to disrespect her." But the prosecutor didn't blink. "You didn't know her title, but you knew her color. And that was enough for you to slap on handcuffs in front of 200 people. Wasn't it, Officer Carson?" His silence was deafening. Mallory, older and once proud of his career, was more stoic. He tried to argue procedure, that they were responding to a potential safety risk. "But did you assess that risk?" the prosecutor challenged. Or did you simply accept a rich woman's fear as fact? Mallory's eyes lowered. Even the defense attorney struggled to offer any meaningful defense. The evidence was simply too overwhelming, and the defendant's own biases were exposed in their recorded language. When it came time for Camilla to testify, the room straightened as if pulled by gravity. She spoke not with fury, but with clarity. They didn't see a legal expert. They didn't see a federal officer. They didn't even see a woman. They saw a body that didn't belong in business class, a color they associated with threat, and they acted not with caution, but with contempt. She paused. I have stood in courtrooms across this country. I've worked on cases that protect the rights of every citizen, including law enforcement. I know the law, and I also know what it feels like when it's turned against you by the very people who swore to uphold it. Her words lingered long after she stepped down from the stand. After just 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned unanimous guilty verdicts for both officers. Mallory and Carson were convicted of violation of civil rights under color of law, unlawful detention, excessive use of force, abuse of authority. The sentencing hearing was equally impactful. The judge, an elderly white man known for his impartiality, spoke directly to the officers. The law cannot breathe where bias chokes it. You were given power, and you used it to humiliate someone who was innocent, not because of facts, but because of fear and arrogance. Today, you will face the very law you disrespected. Each officer was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison, not the maximum, but a sentence strong enough to echo throughout every law enforcement agency in the country. Meanwhile, Evelyn Whitmore, the woman who ignited the tragedy with her venomous accusation, faced her own reckoning. While she wasn't criminally charged due to lack of direct physical involvement, she was not spared from justice. Camilla filed a civil suit against her for defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and false reporting. Evelyn, once the toast of high society luncheons, now found herself in court, trembling on the stand as she tried to explain her fear. She lost. The jury ruled in Camilla's favor, awarding her $750 in damages. But the financial loss paled in comparison to the collapse of Evelyn's reputation. Foundations dropped her. Social clubs expelled her. Friends distanced themselves. Her name became a cautionary tale in whispered circles. Camilla Rowe returned to her post in D.C. quietly. She gave no triumphant interviews. There were no victory laps. Only a single televised appearance, months later, during a Justice Department symposium on civil rights. When asked what the incident taught her, she said, "Power must be trained to recognize humanity before it's given authority. And no one is above the principles of fairness and dignity. Not the police, not a judge, not even me." Her words became a cornerstone of a new DOJ initiative, Bias in the Badge, a nationwide program to train officers in implicit bias, emotional intelligence, and procedural justice using Camilla's case as its founding model. In the final image of her story, Dr. Camilla Rowe was seen walking down the marble steps of the courthouse, alone. No cameras, no applause, just a quiet figure in a black suit, carrying the weight of a moment that could have broken her, but didn't. Because she knew something greater than humiliation. She knew the law. And this time, the law had remembered her name. In the aftermath of the courtroom drama and national headlines, the story of Dr. Camilla Rowe no longer belonged solely to her. It had become a symbol of power misused, of dignity preserved, and of a justice system forced to look at itself in the mirror. But for Camilla, the public attention was never the point. Long after the cameras shut off and the verdicts were filed, she returned to her quiet apartment in Washington, D.C. Her life resumed. She reviewed federal policy drafts, attended legal reform panels, and taught at Georgetown Law on Thursdays. Still, something had shifted both around her and within. There were times late at night when the streets were quiet and the lights from the Capitol glowed faintly through her window, when the incident returned in fragments. The cold press of handcuffs against her skin, the condescension in Brent Carson's voice, the way people looked away, afraid to speak up. But most of all, it was the shame she hadn't deserved, the kind that comes not from guilt, but from being made to feel small in full view of others. That was the part no legal victory could erase. Camilla knew her case had become high profile because of who she was: a federal officer, a legal mind, someone with influence and reach. But she also knew something far more disturbing. Millions of others were not so lucky. People across the country, black men, brown women, immigrants, the poor face the same kind of treatment daily without the safety net of title or status. They were profiled, disrespected, detained, or worse, and the system, more often than not, turned a blind eye. Her case wasn't an anomaly, it was a pattern, one that had finally hit the wrong target. That was the bitter truth. Weeks after the trial, Camilla received a handwritten letter in the mail. The return address was from a small town in Mississippi. Dear Dr. Rowe, my name is Denise. I watched what happened to you on the news. It made me cry, not just for what they did to you, but because I realized how many times they've done it to people like my son and nobody cared. You didn't just stand up for yourself. You stood up for all of us. Thank you. P.S. He wants to be a lawyer now. He says he wants to talk like the lady on TV. With gratitude, Denise Jameson. Camilla held that letter for a long time. It reminded her why she chose this path in the first place. Not to win, but to witness, to resist, to inspire. As part of the settlement with the airport and federal law enforcement, Camilla proposed, not demanded, a forward-looking solution: mandatory civil rights training for all airport security staff, federal officers, and local patrol units working in federal spaces. Her condition was simple: the training had to include real cases, and hers would be the first. Reluctantly at first, but then with growing interest, the agencies agreed. And so, across the country, officers sat in classrooms and training modules watching footage of what had happened at Gate B9. They saw how bias crept in quietly, how assumptions became actions, and how quickly a uniform could become a weapon when not paired with wisdom. It was not revenge. It was reform. And in that, Camilla saw hope. Her story sparked national conversations, university debates on racial profiling and class assumptions, talk shows and podcasts dissecting power blindness, the way people often fail to see dignity when it wears skin they're not used to. Community forums asking difficult questions. Would you have spoken up if you saw what happened? Do you trust the system to protect everyone, or just people who look like you? It wasn't just a legal reckoning, it was a cultural confrontation. And Camilla, though never seeking to be a public figure, became a reluctant torchbearer for something bigger than law, for humanity with eyes wide open. At a small university in Atlanta, Camilla gave a rare speech, standing before students who sat edge of their seats silent. She said, "What happened to me wasn't about broken laws. It was about broken perceptions. I was reduced to someone else's fear, not because I posed danger, but because I challenged their expectations. You may not all wear robes or badges, but you carry something just as powerful, your voice. Use it. Speak when it's hard. Stand when it's inconvenient, because silence is where injustice survives." The room erupted, not in cheers, but in stillness, the kind that marks the beginning of awakening. Months later, Camilla's story became required reading in police academies and civil law courses. A short documentary titled Gate B9 When the Law Looks Away was nominated for a regional Emmy, but the truest legacy wasn't on screen or paper. It was in the thousands of small changes. A gate agent who now questions biased complaints before calling security. A rookie officer who pauses before letting assumptions dictate protocol. A teenage boy in Mississippi who dreams not of being feared, but of being heard. Dr. Camilla Rowe never asked to be a symbol. She was simply a woman on her way home. Tired, composed, holding a boarding pass and a lifetime of earned dignity. She was humiliated. She was stripped of respect by men who thought her silence meant surrender. But she responded not with rage, not with vengeance, but with truth, grace, and a steady hand on the law's shoulder, reminding it of what it promised to be. In doing so, she showed the world a lesson it desperately needed to relearn. Dignity is not given by uniforms, wealth, or whiteness. It is inherent. It is unshakable. And when you try to handcuff it, you only reveal your own chains. It was a quiet morning when Dr. Camilla Rowe returned to Los Verdes International Airport, not out of necessity, but by choice. She walked through the same terminal, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. Gate B9 hadn't changed. Same overhead lights, same digital signs blinking with delayed departures and boarding announcements. But everything inside her was different. She paused in front of the gate not to relive the pain, but to reclaim the space, to stand where she had once been humiliated, and simply breathe. For a few seconds, her eyes closed, not to forget, but to remember without pain. The memory was still there, clear as glass, the cold press of handcuffs, the shouting, the silence of the crowd. But now it came with another image layered over it, justice served, truth spoken, and her name restored. She was not broken, not bitter, only changed. The airport staff didn't recognize her, though her story had been national news. That was fine. Camilla had never sought recognition. What she had always wanted, what she had always believed in, was dignity. Quiet, uncompromised, irrevocable. Before boarding, she took a seat near the window. Outside, planes taxied against a backdrop of morning gold. A little girl nearby pointed at one, wide-eyed. Her father, a black man in a denim jacket, smiled and knelt to explain something to her. Camilla watched them, her lips softening into the faintest smile. There was something beautiful about that moment, the passing of courage between generations. A promise that one day, That little girl could stand in any line, hold any boarding pass, speak with any voice, and not be questioned for simply existing. Camilla took a deep breath. It was time to move forward, not by forgetting what happened, but by carrying it with grace. She boarded with the other business class passengers. No one stopped her this time. No questions, no suspicion, just a nod from the flight attendant and a welcome aboard, Dr. Rowe. And as she walked down the jet bridge, past the threshold where her story had once unraveled, she knew something with quiet certainty. They had tried to strip her power, but all they did was prove how deeply she possessed it. Her dignity had never been in their hands. It had always been in how she stood, how she spoke, and how she rose. Lately, I've been thinking a lot about the quiet moments, the ones without applause, without headlines, without anyone watching. Like this morning, when I helped an elderly man cross a rainy street. No one saw it. No one clapped. But for a brief moment, our lives intersected in something simple and human. That's the kind of world I want to live in. A world where kindness doesn't need an audience, where respect isn't based on title, skin color, or salary, where listening is just as loud as speaking. In our fast-paced, digital-driven lives, it's easy to feel invisible or overlooked, especially when you're doing the right thing without reward. But I've learned that integrity isn't about being seen. It's about being solid, even when no one's looking. So if today you're tired or feel like your goodness goes unnoticed, remember the strongest roots grow underground. Keep standing. Keep choosing grace. The world doesn't always thank people like you right away, but someone is watching. A child, a stranger, your future self. And when that moment comes, your quiet strength will have made all the difference.